And it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitudes, whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with her branches and with a shadowing shroud. And of an stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great, the deeps him up on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers to all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees of the field, and his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long, because the multitude of the waters when he shot forth.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. We're continuing today in the book of Genesis, chapter 41. Well, that's not right. I was there a minute ago. Okay, I was there a minute ago. I had to reboot my computer. Okay, so Genesis chapter 41. Unfortunately, I'm going to leave a note when I upload. This is being recorded Thursday. It'll come out Friday. Well, I'm not going to do a live stream Friday. We're going to restart the live streams on Monday. But there will be a study tomorrow. Well, this will be the study tomorrow, actually. What am I talking about? There'll be a study Monday, and the live streams will resume. All right, or they should resume. Lord willing, of course. I say everything with that in mind. That's how I live my life. I don't think you have to mantra-like repeat it, Lord willing. But it is a good thing to say to remind ourselves. I mean, I don't want to say, I would say I don't believe in mantras per se, but the effectiveness of repeating something over and over and over again, certainly the scriptures attest to that. And we even have songs, sing them over again to me, wonderful words of life. That's why we sing songs over and over again, to imbue ourselves with the knowledge contained in those things. That's why I wrote songs that were more broad and covered a lot of scripture, because I thought, what better to imbue my mind with than the scriptures? So let's begin by reading. I'm trying to make sure my text is open properly. Okay, that's good enough. Just as long as I'm in Genesis, I'm going to be happy. I don't know if we're going to have to look anything up. Genesis 41, verse 1. It's kind of a long chapter. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the other kine upon the brink of the river. And the ill-favored and lean-fleshed kine did eat up the 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke. And he slept and dreamed the second time. And behold, 7 ears of corn came up on one stalk, rank and good. And behold, 7 thin ears, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, and behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt, and the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them Pharaoh told them his dream, but there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. Then spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servants, and put me in ward, and the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. Pardon me here. Okay. Both me and the chief baker, And we dreamed a dream in one night, and I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream. And there was there with us a young man, an Hebrew, servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. To each man according to his dream he did interpret. And it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Me he restored unto mine office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. And they brought him hastily out of the dungeon, and he shaved himself, and changed his raiment, and came in unto Pharaoh. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. And I have heard say of thee, that thou canst understand a dream to interpret it. Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of the river. And behold, there came up out of the river 7 kine, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow. And behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor and very ill-favored and lean-fleshed, such as I never saw in all the land of Egypt for badness. And the lean and the ill-favored kine did eat up the first 7 fat kine, and when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw in my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up in one stalk, full and good. And behold, 7 ears, withered, thin, and blasted with the east wind, sprung up after them. And the thin ears devoured the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it unto me. And Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. God hath showed Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good kine are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. And the 7 thin and ill-favored kine that came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be the 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to do, he showeth unto Pharaoh. Behold, there come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and there shall arise after them 7 years of famine, and all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers over the land, and take up the 5th part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years. And then let them gather all the food of those good years that come. And lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. And that food shall be for store to the land of Egypt against the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt. That the land perish not through famine. And the thing was good in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of his servants. And Pharaoh said unto his servants, Can we find such a one as this is? A man in whom the Spirit of God is? And Pharaoh said to Joseph, Forasmuch as God hath showed thee all this, there is none so discreet and wise as thou art. Thou shalt be over my house, and according to thy word shall all my people be ruled. Only in the throne will I be greater than thou. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, See, I have set thee over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh took off his ring from his hand, and put it upon Joseph's hand, and arrayed him in vestures of fine linen, and put a gold chain about his neck, and made him to ride in the second chariot which he had. And they cried before him, Bow the knee! And he made him ruler over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without thee shall no man lift up his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah, and he gave him to wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. And Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. And Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh, and went throughout all the land of Egypt. And in the 7 plenteous years the earth brought forth by handfuls. And he gathered up all the food of the 7 years, which were in the land of Egypt, and laid up the food in the cities, the food of the field, which was round about every city, and he laid up the same. And Joseph gathered corn, as the sand of the sea, very much, until he left numbering, for it was without number. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of famine came, which Asenath the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bare unto him. And Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God, said he, hath made me forget all my toil, and all my father's house. And the name of the second shall be called Ephraim, for God hath caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. And the 7 years of plenty and plenteousness that was in the land of Egypt were ended. And when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said unto all the Egyptians, Go unto Joseph, what he saith to you, do. And the famine was over all the face of the earth. And Joseph opened all the storehouses, and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine waxed sore in the land of Egypt. And all the countries came into Egypt for Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was sore in all lands. Yeah. As I mentioned, this famine is notable as part of, I don't make this study about dates, because I don't know, I don't believe we can rely on the dates given. It's just not part of what I think constitutes the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, quite frankly. But, I could be wrong about that, obviously. But then, because that would be because of the fact that, I consider, to think otherwise, I would have to consider the evidence of nature to be deceitful. And since I consider the evidence of nature to be a direct revelation of God's handiwork, I don't think that's possible. I think in some sense, the evidence, it's not where we look for truth, but the evidence, like the ultimate truth of life, and what is the meaning of life? What are we doing? What's the interpretation of life, like we talked about? What are we here for? So, like, when exactly it occurred, this, because there's a lot of dispute, because people say, well, there's no record of Joseph in Egypt. There's other records that they wiped out, and also, since Joseph is of an entirely different religion, and in Hebrew, and has different customs, and he refers to God. This is, though, as the Hebrews are in Egypt, as they stay there, they become somewhat assimilated, and here we see Joseph, his wife is an Egyptian. So there's going to be a lot of crossover. That's why when they come out of Egypt, they have to eventually get rid of all the idols they brought, because they just brought all the things they owned, and among them were idols. So, Joseph's lack of, again, if the 10 commandments are not just fresh commandments, but a refreshed commandments of things that were understood as part of what I would call the patriarchal religion, the religion of the ancient fathers, the pre-flood fathers, if Abraham was a successor of that, and in some sense, because of, again, we hear him called And we see around him like Laban has idols and stuff. So there's like idols in the family and stuff. But also there's, like I said, there seems to be, I don't know how you would get from Genesis to Moses without some actual, because like I said, I think, of course, the hand of Moses is in the Pentateuch, of course. He is the author of but like there's other hands involved too. He gathered things from before his time. I mean, certainly, Moses didn't write it alone. We know that at least parts of it were written by the Lord himself, the Ten Commandments particularly. In particular, those are from with the very finger of God saying, these are the things you ought to do and ought not to do. Let there be no mistake. But it's not to say that people didn't know beforehand, like the murder was wrong. Cain and Abel, Cain was already a murderer long before the Ten Commandments said, thou shalt not kill. But what he does in that, he affirms that, and it's part of their covenant. It's like these are the immutable truths of that covenant, or part of it. So Joseph, like I say, he has, as we see clearly, he has a very distinct sense of who God is and what God wants. And Pharaoh even recognizes it as different. You notice Potiphar is priest of On. But God is, when it says God, it's not just any old God. It would be Elohim Yahweh, or Yahweh, or and Yahweh. Yahweh Elohim is a name. But again, when the exact timeline of naming conventions is going to be sketchy because of language changing, because over time, the titles by which God is referred to can be, or the customary names. Like, for example, the Jews don't use any of the ancient names of God for fear of, for fear of, in the very least way, offending. They tithe they make the tithe of mint and anise and cumin to not speak the name of the Lord in vain. But, as we've talked about before, there's more to that commandment. It goes deeper than that, much deeper. Just like thou shalt not kill. It's not just, thou shalt do no murder. That's true. But you shall not hate your brother in your heart is actually something that's buried there. And Jesus reveals that. And though it wasn't unknown, it was known from the very first murder. If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if not, sin lies at the door. He knew the sin was lying there to begin with. You didn't need the commandment for it to be sin. Because Cain knew what he did was wrong. He didn't need to hear thou shalt not kill, but God affirmed it. And that was as part of their covenant. But he wrote that with his very finger. So what I'm saying is Joseph worships a different God. So the idea that the Egyptians wouldn't make images of him, who believes that graven images of God maybe are inappropriate. Clean animals, unclean animals. There's certain parts of the tradition which we see manifested before Moses. Of course, skeptics would probably say that's just Mosaic law being read back into the Genesis. And I could see that, but that wouldn't make sense on a certain level. That Moses, why would he put things that were in his law back on the patriarchs as if it was new? Well, I suppose if, like I said, if he was actually, this was new to him and being renewed to him, but was ancient wisdom understood even by the fathers. And Joseph certainly understands something. Where did he learn it? Well, not in Egypt. When he speaks of God, he's speaking of the God of the Hebrews, Elohim. It's not On. It's not Set. It's not Osiris. It's not Horus. It's not Isis. It's not any of the gods of the Egyptians. It's Elohim, the God of the Hebrews, who reveals truth. Now, Joseph already speaks of him as if he's universal. But and we take it for that. We think Pharaoh hears him saying, oh, God, like God. But very possibly for him. Now, he wouldn't disbelieve in the Hebrews' God. But he may not understand that the Hebrews' God is over all gods. That's something that is established by Moses. But he has respect to the God of Joseph in that he takes the wisdom of his understanding and believes in the interpretation. And you wonder, why is it that so he gives they tell the dream, right? I'm sorry, this particular part of the study, this section, Genesis, has not been as line by line as it usually is. And I suppose because it's mostly narrative, in which I feel like we understand what's being said. We hear the story. So we have to do a little different kind of analysis when we're talking about story. We want a story, we want to analyze each part of the narrative and focus in on those moments where real great truths are revealed. Because Joseph certainly, if you watch, whenever he speaks, he has important things to say. So this dream, that he has, we know the interpretation. And also, it doesn't seem like that hard. But they couldn't see it. And that's not unusual for my money, because we often, sometimes I have to have someone help me find my glasses when I lose them, because I'm literally blinded by my own mistakes, right? Or even if it's not like I can't see, like sometimes I'll misplace something. And I just need someone to come help with fresh eyes and look at the situation, because maybe I put it someplace I'm not accustomed to and just forgot about it real quick because it was something small. It's usually small things like that. I carry a lot of, I have like a water cup, my phone, my keys, my wallet. And these small things, when I'm tracking so many other things, and I have somewhat cluttered environment, the camera's always pointing this way usually, right? Somewhat cluttered, at least my desk is. It's an organized clutter, but it's easy to lose stuff. It's easy to lose stuff or lose track of it, like that, because I don't have my eye on it. And what was I bringing that for? Let me have a sip of water. It'll come to me in a second. Anyways, oh yeah, the obvious, missing the obvious, and also because there is the normalcy bias, or as they call it, or what would I call it? There's another word for it. It's that tendency people have to want things to be good and not want to see negativity. Because this dream is very portentous. It's telling you things are going to be good for 7 years. That can lull you to sleep. And then 7 years of bad, so the overall message is like a humongous famine is coming. 7 years of famine. Now, I don't care how rich you are right now. It doesn't matter how rich you are. If suddenly, this is what preppers are all about, suddenly something happens and everything falls apart and your money becomes worthless. Like all that, or virtually worthless. Because you have to spend almost all of it. This is what happens. You have to spend almost all of it just to be fed. Just to get your food and survive, you end up giving up everything. And the only way to avoid that is to be prepared ahead of time. But how are you prepared ahead of time? There's a couple things you can do. You can just always be prepared, which is hard, especially if you're trying to do other things and trying to extend yourself to the limit. Like if I'm trying to maximize my potential, it's hard to do that while simultaneously siphoning off a fifth or whatever, of what I'm producing to just create a safety net. Because you have to, like, if you're keeping supplies, you got to churn through them. Like 7 years, I don't know how, it depends on what you're storing, obviously. But there is a limit on how long you can store stuff. And also, this could have been a little more complicated than you realize. Because, as far as like, you store up a fifth of what you make 1 year, right? But you use it the next year while storing up technically 2/5. You replace that fifth, or that's what I would do. I would, like you eat up so it doesn't get too old. Eat up that first fifth at the beginning of the next harvest, and then replace it, and then save another fifth. And then the next year, eat the 2/5 and save one more, which is 3/5. And like, and then by 5 years, you have a whole year of harvest in store. And so only in the last 2 years are you overstocking. And what you have is at the most 3 years old. Even in the last 2 years, you could still eat everything there and save up the whole harvest and only have, what I'm saying is when the first year of harvest comes, the grain you're eating is only like at most 2 years old. The first grain is going to be 2 years old. Or something like that, 2/5, 7 years. Yeah, but then it's going to be, then you think about it, the amount they save. I don't know, that's still, everything's going to have to be rationed out. Because you can't save up all 7. But the idea is the 7 years of plenty, I suppose, actually as you're saving, I don't know, I wonder about that. It's only one, I guess the 1/5 is more than you need. See, I'm not calculating right. But I'm just saying there probably was it may have been even more complicated than that. But for the sake of this story, it just said, hey, save up every year this. We don't need the boring detail. Here I've given boring details of probably how they'd have to do that. Because I was thinking about storage and long-term stuff. Because I think about that. Because I think about, okay, how do I store? Like I did an experiment. I have a underground thing, and I was storing potatoes in there, and they all went rotten. So I got to figure out what I did wrong. I'll look up tutorials. The thing is, I just threw a couple bags in there just to see what would happen. And to see if it was as easy as that. It's not as easy as that. So, got to do a little more research. Anyways. So, the trick is to see the bad thing coming, ultimately. If you see a bad thing coming and you're able to prepare just ahead of that, you can kind of maximize things from before that. Because like to be always ready, also, you may not be totally ready for what comes. It may be beyond what you're preparing for. A lot of people prepare for something with like a bug out bag and, this and that and the other. And then, again, if you live in a city, that's what you're thinking. But there's not, that's a very short-term, you get short-term prospects with something like that. I'm not a prepper, by the way. I don't have extensive preparations. I have some, this year for the first time ever, I had a power outage and I was actually able to hook up my generator to a well, or my well to the generator is what I should say, because I didn't do it the other way. That would be not right. You don't hook up your generator to the well. You unhook the well from the power supply and then put it into your generator. But I finally did that and I was able to have water during the power outage. First time in 20 years out here. Well, that's about, I don't have like stores of food and stuff, because like I said, one of the things you got to eat that food over time. You can't store it forever, or you throw it away and you just take the loss. Well, that's kind of it's like a lot of the food they sell for, survival food is not exactly what we would consider worth. It's the kind of food you should eat. It's sort of like, yeah, it's the minimalist, but it's not exactly a good long-term solution. Anyhow, and neither is this, honestly. It's just like, well, we just got to get through those 7 years. And it's interesting, it's 7 years, is it not? Like the tribulation of 7 years. Right? Are we living in those 7 years now? I don't know. It doesn't seem like it to me. But there's a lot we could learn from what's going on, because, as events do begin to match. I got, like I've pointed out throughout the times we've been living in, I see a lot more matches of similar things than I have in the past. Mostly just seeing how things like how society would handle something like a mark of the beast. And so the people say the mark, like I said, the mask was not the mark of the beast, but it's a lot like it. Like if you think about the way it was with masks, that's just how it's going to be with the mark of the beast, except worse. And it's funny, that's not the mark of the beast. Well, it's very mark of the beastie. It's funny, they're like, oh, it's not a mark of the beast. It's like, yeah, I know. Well, technically speaking, that's technically not. It's like all these people, there's technicality. They strain in a gnat and they swallow a camel. So always watch out for those gnat strainers. Okay, so we heard the dream. I'm not going to go over each line. It's a long way of saying it. I just want to make sure the only thing I thought about is I was like, okay, well-favored, fat-fleshed. He was well-favored. These are nice-looking animals. Fat. And they look genetically good. Not like sick or having anything wrong with them, like lame. These were good looking beef, man. Kine, and that's what kine reference. Maybe that's the word we don't use anymore. That it refers to cattle. 7 well-favored kine. I guess that's what technically. I mean, I should. Well, if I look it up, it's going to be something like that, I suppose. I've assumed that for a long time. And actually, I can't look it up on my computer as I was about to. I'd have to look it up on my phone, and the password isn't. It's been too long. But, Genesis 1, Genesis 41. There were a few words I want to look at, so I'm sorry I didn't have this open. Especially because this is pre-recorded, but that's okay. Well, it says cows in the Berean Standard Bible. And then, we know what it says in the King James. So I'm going to assume that that's probably what it's, I'm going to see a definition like that. But there were other words I wanted to look up coming up. And it actually was the word rank. Because I think of rank as like, ooh, that's rank. Like not good. But apparently it means fat. And that's from the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, the word is bara, and it means to be fatted or plump. I never knew that the word rank in English, I mean, obviously it means rank like in order, which also makes sense with the idea of fat. With higher rank means big, we have the idea of gravitas and largesse, and when someone's bigger, it also has it's the metaphorical sense of being more important, higher ranked. So the idea of rank being fat, I never knew that. I thought it was going to mean something like well favored. All right, I'm going to leave the sound on. I'm just going to go fix that fan. It's making kind of noise. I'm going to have a new video card soon, I think, because I was trying to work on something earlier and it just quit. I mean, the screen just went black, and I assumed the computer was still working, but there was no more video signal. I reached over there and touched the video card, and it was hot. So that's definitely something, and I hope that will, and maybe that'll lead into maybe a little better camera, I guess. I don't know. I do think I probably should have a little better one. Not that I don't know. This one's fine, but I think I wanted to do a better one for music videos, actually, for my simple guitar videos, because I like to record them at the thing, and I don't know. But then again, I don't really care about that. The video, as far as that goes, is not that important, as long as it's getting done. So, rank means fat. Well, that's something I didn't know. All right. Fat and fat-fleshed. Well, what's fat-fleshed mean then? Fleshy? I like that. Fat and fleshy. Rank and good. Wait. Oh, fat-fleshed. Oh, okay, wait. Ill-favored. Lean-fleshed. Okay, wait a second. Is fat-fleshed the same? That's what I'm curious about for some reason. Is that rank? Oh, that's similar. It's bari. From bara. It's the adjective. See, this word rank apparently is the noun. All right, whatever. So basically, fat-fleshed is the same as rank. Similar, I should say. It's like fat-fleshed and fat, or something like. Not even. It's more like fat and fatter, or fatty. Something like that. Yeah, fat and fatty. 7 well-favored kind and fatty. Well-favored. What was well-favored? I'm just going to look it up just because might as well at this point. Great. And that took me away from my Strong's King James. And put me back at the Berean Standard Bible. I thought the Bereans had King James Bibles they placed, but maybe they finally succumbed to the controversy. Well-favored. I'm just curious if it's one word or something. Yeah, it is. It's sight, appearance, or vision. Okay, yeah. So ill-favored and well-favored are, I think, the same word, but just positive and negative. Like not in front of it, basically. So 7 other kind came up out of the river, or we held that. So the reason, for what I was saying before, the magicians, he called for all the magicians of Egypt. I don't know what magicians means. That's a good word to look at, right? What do you mean by magicians? What, like David Copperfield? That's like really out of date, isn't it? Harry Houdini? That kind of magician? Well, no. An illusionist? Now they're said to perform illusions. That's not to say that the performing of illusions. But this says, from the same as cheret, a horoscopist is drawing magical lines or circles, according to Strong. And according to this other NAS, they say it means an engraver or a writer, I guess, like that. Same idea of like, from the same as sheret. It comes from a root that means something about circles, I guess. Oh, no, it means an engraving tool stylist. The learned men. Learning is like magic. It is. Being able to read is like magic. Imagine, to someone who can't interpret these symbols on my screen, the fact that I'm just rattling them off, it's like magic. We just take it for granted. A lot of times things people don't understand, they write off to magic or something else. Well, it's magic. It's like something in that sense, yeah, it is. It is magic. It's like when someone plays a musical instrument, it's like magic. It's because the people don't understand. And that's the thing, they don't understand. People don't understand, and oftentimes those engaging in writing, the intellectual class, the elites, they don't know either. The thing is, people of learning of letters, it should be something that is an asset to society. There's a really good book called Intellectuals in Society by Thomas Sowell. And it talks about this thing like the vision of the anointed. They mean that there are these anointed ones among us who have the vision, who can see what we need to do and how we need to live and to order our society and to make everything perfect. If we would only listen to them, But more often than not, they don't know. And the issue oftentimes is that there is no true fear of God in them. Yes, they are learned, but they are not good. They're not, I don't know. It's hard. I don't want to I could generalize, but there's so many ways in which people with intellect fall short because of their arrogance, because of their blindness to their own errors. I mean, look at the way Jesus talked to the scribes and Pharisees. That's not just a religious critique. That's a critique of the elite in every part of the human experience. They're always like that. They're always like the scribes and the Pharisees. They're always a bunch of guys too full of themselves to see the writing on the wall. So, to allude to Daniel, right? And the handwriting on the wall. I mean, so they can't interpret the dream because they can't conceive. They're used to when you go to Pharaoh to interpret things, you come to him with good news and good news only, perhaps. Or that is oftentimes when you're dealing with an absolute ruler, that is the wisdom that grows up around them. Even if let's say this Pharaoh is not as harsh maybe as his father. The servants are all kind of attuned to trying to subtly manipulate and to nudge, but never to openly tell him things that it's like it may be known. It's not wise to be the bearer of bad news. Meaning even if he is a man who can, the Pharaoh is a man who can hear bad news and deal with it. Sometimes among the underlings, there are those who are not willing to do so. To say the hard things. I feel like a lot of what we did in the pandemic was like they scared the crap out of people, but they didn't give them courage to take on and to face what was coming. And then most of them had nothing to fear, as is manifest. Most of us had nothing to fear. But they will, in our fear, they will tell us to look to the experts. Here Pharaoh looks to the experts. You know? Look to the experts. I'm going to go to the people who are well, you know, and also that engraving, I guess, in a circle, you know, it's like the writings in the skies. And I have no idea I have no doubt that part of what they would study would be astrology and all that stuff, because it was very important to the ancients. The motions of the heavens, they very much were schooled in. But for all your learning, you can know a whole lot of things, but then something unusual, something outside of your experience comes in. And one, God can just make you blind to it. And often we are blind to many things. It's not God doing it to us. It's just our nature. By nature, we don't see all that we should see. And God has to open our eyes so that we could see it. I think Joseph's confidence, even for such a young man, you know, he's like 30 years old. You know, he's been, I emphasized last time, you know, he's been in prison 2 years. And we dwelt on that last time, the time in prison. I would say, notice, oh no, we didn't go there. We didn't get to Joseph yet. We still were talking about me and the chief baker. So Pharaoh tells this dream. They can't answer. They don't have an answer because of whatever, but we can imagine many reasons. And the reason we should imagine those reasons is we should meditate on that we become not the men of letters, those who can read and write, the literate people who can't interpret. You know what I mean? The words are delivered to him that is learned. And he's saying, right? Remember, the book is delivered to him that is not learned. He says, I cannot read. And the sealed book is delivered to him that is learned. He says, it's sealed. Can't open it because I know it's got a seal on it. No one can read the book. The unlearned man is not learned enough to read it. The learned man is afraid to read it because it's sealed, because there's something hidden there. He's afraid to open it. It could be fear. What could this dream mean? They're as afraid as he is, and they can't answer him. Yeah, I don't know exactly why, but I can imagine why. Like I said, let's not be that way. Let us not be so stuck in our ways, so married to tradition that we cannot hear God's voice or understand his interpretation. Interpretations belong to God. The true interpretation of a thing should be a universal truth, not what you think and what I think. Not like, well, this is my truth and this is your truth. You have your truth, I have my truth, but none of them matter. One truth that matters is God's truth. Our truth is going to pass away. So we got to make his truth make our truth, so that our truth is his truth. Because that is what we must believe. And so, as this is happening, the chief butler remembers as he says, my faults. This is something I should have mentioned it to Pharaoh right away. You know, and then Pharaoh's he hasn't had a dream he needed interpreted till this moment, so he's not going to be angry with him. But he says, but his fault is mainly towards Joseph, because he remembered Joseph is still in prison 2 years later. And he speaks, Pharaoh was wroth with his servants and put me in ward in the captain of the guard's house, both me and the chief baker. We dreamed a dream, right? And then in short order, he explains how this Hebrew. And again, notice he emphasizes that he was in Hebrew. He's different. He was a servant to the captain of the guard. We told him, and he interpreted to us our dreams. It came to pass as he interpreted it, it was. Me he restored to mine office, him he hanged. We read about that, how the awful death the baker endured and how the butler was restored to his office. And so Pharaoh immediately sends and calls for Joseph. And they hastily bring him out of the dungeon. And he shaves himself because in Egypt they shaved themselves. The Hebrews, not so, well, not while he was in the dungeon anyways, but also by custom. Certainly by the time of the law of Moses, it was customary, and in the law, thou shalt not round the corners of your beards. I don't know how Ben Shapiro gets around that, and a lot of other Jews who do shave. I suppose because there is another... that's actually in the New Testament. What am I talking about? But maybe they figure, it would be... Actually, I remember E.W. Bullinger said it was so you don't make a tuft of hair. Meaning you don't want to have a beard like a goatee or something. But I swear I've seen Shapiro wearing a goatee. So I don't know. Maybe they've... That part doesn't count, right? We follow the law. Well, most of the law, right? And hey, I agree. If the Lord, I think the Lord, if you could follow most of that stuff, the problem is most of it's not even hard. It's like, what, you're just too lazy to put on the uniform? You know what I mean? It's like, come on. If salvation only required you to wear certain clothes and eat certain foods, I'm not saying that's the way it is, but you think like, whoa, that's easy. It's funny because it's sometimes not. Sometimes salvation is about wearing the right clothes and eating the right food. I'm not sure how that food works. How the clothes work in so much as the food. Because the things we eat, the good things that God has created don't hurt us. But some of the things that we have created with our machines and with our technology and our science and our chemistry are quite possibly responsible for any number of the ailments that have, when you consider that we are living longer, but we're sicker. And longer is an average, by the way, and it usually has a lot more to do with the infant mortality. But my point is, people are sicker and they're being preserved. In the olden days, if you had the illnesses we have, we'd all be dead a lot sooner. You know what I mean? If they got sick the way we get sick, they would have had a way lower life expectancy than ours. It's only because modern methods are able to preserve us that we're still have this. Well, in America, our life expectancy has declined, unfortunately. At least that's as I heard recently. So Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. They brought him hastily, shaved him. He changed his clothes. He comes in and he gets dressed appropriately to come before Pharaoh. I was going to mention before, notice Pharaoh is called Pharaoh, king of Egypt in the last chapter, right? Because Pharaoh is it's actually a title. It's not really his name. And that's the same in some, like, in some of the Persians kings, it gets confusing because they often take their predecessors' names, like Caesar. It's like Caesar. Well, it's Augustus Caesar, Tiberius Caesar. And then a bunch of people that weren't even related to him were also called Caesar. That's how Pharaoh works. That's how a lot of kings of the nations worked in the ancient world. And we'll see some of that when we get to different parts of the Bible. I'll point out it's like that's a title. I think we were talking about Abimelech. Was it Abimelech or one of the kings of the that they had to do with in the earlier part of Genesis? I forget the names sometimes escape me, but we were talking about how that was probably a title, like Father King and all that stuff like that. And I forget what Pharaoh means. I remember looking it up. It means the king of Egypt, as I recall. I thought the other day, I was like, oh, there might have been a mistake I made about when they knew the name of Yahweh. There's a verse I thought. I'm going to have to look that up. I may have had a mistake there. I'll definitely put that correction in. It might be a bit late for it, but okay. Might have to do a little research on that. So Joseph comes in and he is told the dream, and he immediately knows the interpretation. And also that it's the same dream. He's saying you have one. The two dreams are one. The 7 good are 7 years. The 7 good kind are 7 years. The 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one. He repeats it. God has showed you what he's about to do. And so the 7 ill-favored. I always liked in Pharaoh's story how when they come up and they eat the other cows, that they're not any, they're not, they don't get fatter for having eaten the fat cows, which is creepy, right? Because it's like M.C. Escher territory. You know, M.C. Escher, the guy that drew the staircases that go up into the ceiling and stuff like that, and you know, and doors that fit backwards or whatever. There's all those optical illusions that where the converging lines deceive you into thinking, but then it turns around. It's like that's the sort of thing when you have 7 scrawny cows eat 7 fat cows, and they don't get any fatter. Same thing with the grain. And that's part of what helps them understand the nature of this famine. That it's going to be not just like 7 good years, 7 followed by 7 so-so years. 7 years that'll make you forget you had good years. They swallow them up. 7 empty years blasted with the east wind. I had an album called The Day of the East Wind. The east wind was supposed to be a wind that was this hot and it wasn't the wind that always blew, but when it did, for a sustained period, I noticed where I live, the east wind, when the east wind blows, it's usually really cold. It's usually not good weather, at least here. And there, what I understand is that it was this hot wind off the desert that could blast your crops, and that's why it blasted with the east wind. Like hot air, not enough water. That's drought. And I think that's one of the causes of the Bronze Age collapse that is suspected was a drought, or part of it. I have no doubt there were multiple, history is never just like one thing. It's just like when they were trying to talk about, the environment as a single issue, like it's all about carbon. You gotta be kidding me. There's a lot more garbage we're putting into the atmosphere. Not only that, what about the war? What's the carbon footprint on that war? We're really in a climate emergency, and we got time to go drop bombs and explode things and burn down stuff. It's like, that's all for, go blow up pipelines under the sea. All that's great because it's acceptable as long as we're killing people. But if we're trying to save people, we really need to cut down our emissions. If you're trying to do good things for people's lives, you need to cut down your emissions. You need to stop driving to the grocery store and start driving a tank, because that's saving the world. You need to drive an electric car and a diesel-fueled tank and a uranium-tipped missile, or depleted uranium shells. So he's showing Pharaoh what he's about to do, which is nice. It doesn't always give people a foreglimpse of what is to come. So he explains it. It's also because he's helping Joseph. By this wisdom he is giving to Pharaoh, he is raising Joseph in Pharaoh's estimation, lifting up Joseph's head before Pharaoh to say, hey, look at my servant. And the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following. It shall be very grievous. And for that, the dream was doubled to Pharaoh twice. I like it doubled twice. What was it, 4 times? It was just funny that it says it that way. And that's not translation error. It's just the way it goes. It is because the thing is established by God. And I'm not saying that's not a mistake. It's just this was done. A lot of times they would do stuff like that for emphasis. Like when we say in English, there ain't no way. They say, that's technically not. Yeah, I know it's technically not correct. In slang, though, it's a way of emphasizing. You double negative to emphasize. You increase it. That's the actual way that's used. And here also, it's being used also to emphasize. Just as the dream was emphasized, he is emphasized. It was doubled twice. It's because the thing is established by God. 2 times, 2 witnesses. And God will surely bring it to pass. That's 2 witnesses. He gave them 2 different dreams, same message. Just like the witnesses. 2 witnesses, same message. Maybe different circumstances, different this, different that, a lot of different external things, but in the essence of it, the same. And that's why I mean about the mark of the beast. Though, I I would say that the mask issue was far less in magnitude. Like, I was able to easily circumvent the rules around masking and to, all except in the hospital, right? I didn't try, though I know people who did. At the height of the pandemic, it was very difficult because people, later on it became a little more plausible for people just to be like, oh, whatever, And so then he immediately gives the advice. Now, I don't know if this is presumptive. It's not quite. Again, remember, this is what I mean about gaps in the chronology, or even gaps in the narrative. For one, there's 2 years go by and we don't hear any details, right? But even in this narrative, which seems like pretty much like, well, that's all the events. Well, there was other stuff that had to happen in between. For example, when the baker, there was something about, like when the baker speaks to Pharaoh, what, he just interrupted him? He just walked up and, hey, Pharaoh, I knew this guy. I just don't think, or the butler, that might work, but it was like, I think it would also be, well, I don't know. Maybe he would be a lot, oh, wow, I got a sudden hit. Maybe that's probably wrong. I was thinking that maybe it would be odd for him to speak up like that. Like, I do remember my faults this day, just up in, or he probably requested to speak, may I speak? So I don't know if Joseph just chimed in immediately with his advice, or if possibly Pharaoh may have asked for it and it just wasn't recorded. You gotta understand that is a possibility, because like I said, the narratives are not. You shouldn't have this expectation that it's 100% complete, because it just couldn't. Like Jesus, it even said of him that if all the things he did and said were written down, the world perhaps could not contain the books. And so we don't assume that we have the whole story. You shouldn't. And that's I think one of the mistakes people make. Just like with the use of idioms and figures of speech, it's like not everything is little. I mean, there was he gives his advice on how to deal with the famine, right? Basically take out a discreet and wise person, send him over the land of Egypt. Very good advice. Let him appoint office. He's got a big thing coming. Take the fifth part. You're going to do a heavy tax. It's 20%. But there'll be extra those years. And so they gather in 20% a year to set aside for the future, and that would create a increasing stock as each year compounded excessive production. And Pharaoh looks around, and says to his servants, well, are we going to find someone such as this? A man in whom is the Spirit of God. I don't know, I don't know. I don't know if Pharaoh is actually recognizing Joseph as having a different God. The Egyptians would have recognized the other gods, just as the Hebrews recognized that there were other gods out there. Not that they were real, necessarily. Like, not to say that Pharaoh believed in their gods or that Jews believed in the gods of the Egyptians, but they acknowledged that people had other gods. That's acknowledged. And so I don't know if this acknowledgement is also sort of accommodation. I don't know that fact, and I want to think, I guess I'm sort of drawn into the thought, was it an accommodation, was it not? So it says, well, as much as God has showed thee this, there's none so discreet and wise as you. Must be, because he gave me the dream and he gave you the interpretation. So he very wisely sees the connection, We should not be afraid to make the connection when it's obvious. When the Lord testifies to something, we should at least follow it till the Lord shows us that we shouldn't anymore. Always keep in mind, primarily to follow the Lord. and no other person or ministry. You know what I mean? You can follow other persons in ministry because there's a lot of people with good things to say. But in so doing, be cautious that you don't give yourself wholly to just listening to what they say. You know, it's like, and also it helps to what kind of things do people say? Are they trying to, get you to do kind of things to make you like them? Except it's like, wear the right tassels on your garments and eat the right foods and all that. And it's not, how to become like the Lord, at least in the most fundamental way, which is the inner sense that our outward may be clean also and may do God's will. So he puts him over his house. Only in the throne will he be greater than now. It's a lot like what he had with Potiphar, except now he kind of fell down and became still in his position in the prison, still in a position of privilege, because he was too valuable. Because he's just a smart organizer, and obviously wise in the way he speaks too. Because with a few words, he convinces Pharaoh of his own, of his own worth, without trying to, without being obvious. He's trying to promote himself. I'm not saying he was trying to promote himself, but he does a good job of promoting himself without actually promoting himself. You know what I mean? And that's good. Let another man's lips praise you, as it says in the New Testament, right? Or no, I think that's Proverbs or something. I forget. But because it's when someone constantly tune their own horn, there's nothing more just absolutely tiresome sometimes. So he, takes off the ring, puts the gold chain on, gives him special clothes. I have set you over all the land of Egypt. No one's going to be greater in this. Nothing's going to happen. He made him ride in the second chariot which he had, and cried before him, bow the knee, bow before my servant. He's almost equal to Pharaoh. Everyone would pay him the same respect. And Pharaoh, that's what Pharaoh wants. He wants everyone to listen to him because that guy is doing what he wants done. I've often used that in my own family too. It's like, I give authority to the eldest, and I try to train them for that. But in each situation, actually, when the oldest one in a particular situation is presumed to be in charge, and they know they're supposed to be in charge, and that charge includes responsibility. Now Joseph understands his responsibility. The Pharaoh, he could ask Potiphar what he thinks of him. In the movie they had him actually. What do you say? But and you can ask the keeper of the prison also. But as far as his competency, as far as his moral, question, the questions they may have about his moral character, the Hebrew rapist, as far as that's what it's like, that Jew tried to rape me. Basically he's not a Jew. I know. He's a Hebrew though. And so are the Jews. And so Pharaoh gives him this name, Zaphathaneah. It's like something like, I forgot what it means. It means like God speaks and interprets or something. I don't know. And there's something about, I forget. It's something to do with, of course, his role. What he is. He's going to give him a name based on, you're the guy who helped me out that time I had the dream. They like to give them, names that make sense. Hello, dream interpreter. That's what he calls them all the time. Dream interpreter, come here, or whatever. I've moved through this chapter pretty fast, which is good because I do want to. We're going to start next time on Monday on verse 46, actually. Zaphnath Paneah. Probably not enough. Zaphnath Paneach. God speaks Otsof. So I think that I think that's not the God speaks and he lives. I wonder if that's their generic word for a God. Sophanath, because I thought Soph was one of their gods. Well, whatever. That's something you could look into, because I'm sure there's people who've done research on that, as far as on that word. Like I said, that's not usually my thing. I usually try, and again, maybe in this book, it ought to be my thing, I guess. I don't have time to do that preparation yet. Sometime later in life I may do a more involved Bible study, but anyways, it means that God speaks and he lives. It's a good name. I knew it was something about God speaking. God speaks and he lives. Well, he takes it as an article of faith it strikes him that's what this dream means. That's also it must have struck home. It must have resonated with his spirit like, yes, that's it. And of course, over the next 7 years, it becomes obvious as the plenties just starts rolling in. And he gives him a wife, the daughter of a priest of On. I don't know who the priest of On is, and that's something maybe I could look up for next time because we're out of time now. But we will pick it up at verse 46. At we'll have the tale of that. We'll probably, have to do something about getting into chapter 42. We'll see. So hopefully you'll see this Friday or over the weekend. And then on Monday, we'll start back with the live streaming. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to being back again and hopefully on the live stream on Monday. Until then.
And it came to pass in the 11th year, in the 3rd month, in the 1st day of the month, that the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, speak unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and to his multitudes, whom art thou like in thy greatness? Behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon, with her branches and with a shadowing shroud. And of an high stature, and his top was among the thick boughs. The waters made him great, the deeps him up on high, with her rivers running round about his plants, and sent out her little rivers to all the trees of the field. Therefore his height was exalted above all the trees.